Can you give us some idea of what has happened in this past year?
For the last ups and downs in the level of the cooperation between Israeli security forces, the army and police, and the settlers. We've been at one of the all-time highs I've seen in 27 years for the past 3 years. One day, I am accompanying and trying to protect Palestinians to get to their lands registered by Israel as belonging to them. The security forces are doing nothing to keep the settler flocks out of their vineyards and olive groves and fields. An officer, a 15-minute lecture that we are the problem. He says, I don't care, it's not my business if settlers are on Palestinian land and destroying their fields and groves and vineyards. That's not my problem. You, when you help Palestinians come to their lands who would not come without you, you are therefore causing problems for those settlers who are on the Palestinian land. And that's why you're the problem. You are the problem because you are helping Palestinians get to the land, and that's being somehow bad to poor settlers who are there destroying Palestinian land. Unfortunately, that is not unusual. I'm not saying every Israeli soldier is like that. My children has just finished the army, the other is in the army. I don't think those are their morals, but that is what is absolutely happening. There have been so many cases. There was a case in the Jordan Valley where the settlers came and attacked Palestinians. Then when the army came and watched while the settlers were beating the Palestinians, and then backed the story that it had been the Palestinians that had attacked the settlers. And we see that again and again and again. We just saw that in the South Urban Hills last week. All the Israeli press carry the settler version of events that a mob of 30 Palestinians had attacked and injured a settler. And a settler in this case, unlike the other case I just mentioned, was actually injured. No investigative reporting, no responsible looking and getting both sides before you publish something. Finally, it's come out and a 23 video surfaced showing him a speedy recovery. But he came masked with an iron bar and started attacking land on the Palestinians' land. And then apparently the Palestinian farmer who has been languishing in jail for now since last week with 2 broken arms because he was accused of attempted murder, apparently tried to defend himself. And it only, maybe if we have a little ray of hope, is many of the Israeli media outlets have done tshuva by at least now publishing this, and it's become a little bit of a story for a brief amount of time. And now let's talk about the Israeli High Court. If we stay in Masafa Yatta, the South Urban Hills, back after the Israeli army had expelled 700 men and women and children from their homes, their caves that they lived in the South Urban Hills, a Israeli High Court Justice, Dalia Derner, went ballistic when she realized that the army had expelled them from their homes based on a whole concocted story, evidence that they didn't have, which wouldn't have been relevant in any case, that they all had homes somewhere else, as if that would matter, and therefore it was justified expelling them from their caves. And she ordered them back home. This year, the Israeli High Court green-lighted that all these little hamlets in the South Urban Hills, that they can all the residents can be expelled. Even an anthropologist who wrote a book published by the Ministry of Defense showing the roots of these people living in these caves for over 200 years has been outraged how that same High Court accepted a misinterpretation of what he wrote. And the court said, international law is a suggestion, it's not an obligation. There are two key words, which are despair and fatigue. I think that's true whether we're talking about progressive Israelis or Palestinians. So let's start with the Palestinians. Why is it that while many of us progressives are looking on with horror at the possibility of somebody like Itamar Ben-Gvir, who, a disciple of Meir Kahane, openly who think of him as a government minister. And while we look on with that as with horror, I think most Israeli Palestinians, what's the big difference? Are the one thing that could change a possible election outcome would be Israeli Palestinians voting in large numbers. Most people say the predictions are that they will not, that the number of them voting goes down, because they say we don't see such a difference between Netanyahu and Lapid or Gantz or any of the other possible government prime ministers. I think that when we look growing strength of Hamas in the occupied territories, and we look on also with great concern about looking like the Palestinian Authority is losing control in more and more parts of the West Bank potentially, and whatever. I think it's because Palestinians see that nothing has progressed. Back in Israel, this great promise of an Israeli-Palestinian party joining the coalition for the first time ever with Ram, and almost none of what they were promised in the coalition agreements actually happened. And this is in the change government. So for all these reasons, I often think about what you have tried to teach over the years about the God of Exodus as the God of endless possibilities, even when everything looks like there's no hope in sight. I can believe that although I don't see anything changing in the foreseeable future, there's always a possibility of something miraculous and unforeseen happening. But it's easy to see why there is so much despair. Now, fatigue. Many progressives who at some level do believe and aspire for a Israel that is not an occupier, because they also see no hope in sight. It's like, let's move on and deal with something else. We're tired of continuing to think about this and think about this and think about this, or even try to act or be activists. For that reason also, our forces, those who are still have the energy and will to get up in the morning and say, what am I going to do to work for a more just Israel, an end to the occupation, they're dwindling. People have laughed at me for many, many years as being one of the last optimists standing. As a person of faith, again, who believes in what you've always taught us, God is the God of endless possibilities. I continue to believe that something can change, maybe tomorrow, maybe not in my lifetime. Sometime the arc of history is going to be very hard also for me, the eternal optimist, to talk optimistically, because the reality, I'm not going to give up. I have many wonderful compatriots who are not going to give up. I call on progressive Jews in the United States not to give up, but you just have to be stubborn and say, we will not submit to fatigue. We will not submit to despair, even when everything looks like there is nothing that can be. We'll always believe, as I've always said, remembering what we learned for Rosh Hashanah from the Talmud, to look at all of life as two perfectly balanced scales. And we never know what little thing we do that seems pointless, irrelevant, meaningless, ineffective at the time, whether that will be the action that on some cosmic level is going to tip those scales one way or the other. And so we have to always maintain our faith and determination to do whatever we can to tip the scales in the right direction.